Good evening, everyone. We're going to get started. We're happy to have all of you here with us tonight. My name is Steve Whitman, and it looks like our sponsor logos are going away, but that's okay. I'd like to start off by thanking you all and thanking the Flying Monkey for allowing us to have this space, as well as Central New Hampshire Chamber of Commerce, Pemmy Baker TV, who's filming right now, our local Rotary chapter, and the Grafton County Regional Development Corporation. I'm joined up here tonight with Peter Francis. Peter has been generous to give us some of his time tonight, and I had a chance to I've known Peter actually for a while, a little over 12 years. I've known his work mostly, but I had a chance to get to know him a little bit more before the event tonight and to learn that we are both planners by education. So he's a Cornell graduate in city planning. He's not a demographer. He's a demographic specialist. He was the originator of American Demographics for 20 years? 20 years. Highly successful magazine that was bought out by Dow Jones. I also asked if he would like to be introduced as a consultant. He says he's not a consultant, that he does not tell you what to do. He just tells you what he sees in the demographics. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Peter. He has about a 20 to 30 minute presentation, which is going to be followed by a couple of additional panelists who we're lucky to have with us tonight, who I'll introduce then, and largely a conversation with you. It's going to be an opportunity. We'll have a couple of people with microphones here, and my role is just going to be able to see you if you're waving at me and you have questions or comments you want to share. We're really hoping that this can be a conversation that helps all of us move forward within our towns and as a region. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to Peter. You're very welcome.
Thank you all for coming. Am I holding this microphone correctly? This is good. He's got his hands up, so I'm doing this right. It's delightful to be here. It's been a long time since I was in Plymouth, and it's a wonderful ride up here. And I'm thrilled to see so many people who are interested in this topic. I'm going to talk only for a short time, and then I'm going to ask you questions, or hopefully we'll get questions from you. 12 years ago, 2008, so 11 years ago, Lorraine Merrill, myself, and Jay Childs did a project called Communities and Consequences 1, the unbalancing of New Hampshire's human ecology. We are now embarking on a sequel called Communities and Consequences 2, rebalancing New Hampshire's human ecology. What you see here is the cover of the book that is going to accompany Jay Child's 30-minute video. And I asked the fine artist who lives in Exeter named Bruce Jones to give me an image that would show what we're trying to do. The demography of New Hampshire is out of balance. And what we are trying to do is to show different methods for bringing it back into balance, because our future depends on that, without any question. Now, I'm going to start way back in 1990. I'm sorry to do this, but how many people were here, that is, living in New Hampshire in 1990? Oh my God, look at that. Thank you so much for that show of hands. Well, if you remember 1990, it was almost 30 years ago, 29 years ago. New Hampshire was a totally average state. We had the same median age as the rest of the country. We had the same proportion of retired people, of working age people, of children. We looked just like the rest of the country. Now, we weren't very diverse. We're still not very diverse. But that's not really the issue. From an age perspective, we mirrored the rest of the country. And of course, we're a perfect place to have the first in the nation primary. In that relatively short period of 29 years, we have gone from being the 28th state in terms of median age, very average, to being the second oldest state in the nation. We aged faster than any other state in the country. Now, it was not intentional. Nobody rang a bell and said, this is what we're going to do. It just happened. And it happened because of a series of actions by people living in one of the 283 towns in New Hampshire, one of the 160 plus school districts, to essentially exclude children from their community. And they perhaps did it knowingly, perhaps unknowingly, but not only did they exclude children, they excluded their parents. And that, of course, was the real problem, is that they engineered it so that New Hampshire was an enormously welcoming place for retirees. Now, I'm not retired, but I'm certainly of retirement age. And the AARP ranks New Hampshire as one of the best places in the country to retire to. And town after town after town, many of the towns in this region, provide huge financial incentives for people to retire here. We give people over 65 property tax breaks in the millions and millions of dollars. We create housing where only people over the age of 55 can move in. It's called age-restricted housing. Now, there's plenty of age-restricted housing around the country. There's lots of it in Florida. But they don't build it at the exclusion of any other type of housing. They can build 100 units of any kind of housing and 100 units of age-restricted, no problem. But here in New Hampshire, age-restricted housing has been used for the last 25 or so years to essentially put housing in that will never put any kids in the school. Now, you say, well, how could this have happened? Well, it happened for a very simple reason, and that is that people in New Hampshire came to believe in myths. Now, myths are not a problem ordinarily. There's lots of myths. I won't enumerate them. I'm sure you can think of several that are quite benign. But there are three myths which are deeply ingrained into the psyche of people who live in New Hampshire, and particularly of people who serve on planning boards. And the first myth is that every single child that lives in our town is costing me personally $15,000 on my property taxes. Because the average cost of education per child is $15,000. Now, it's slightly different in different districts. It's 13 and some. If we lived in Newcastle, it would be $30,000. 27,000 in other places. It varies from place to place. But the average for the state is 15,000. The problem with everybody knowing that number is that educating children is not an average cost. It's a fixed cost. So the Compton School District, the Lincoln School District, operating those school districts, there's 3 school districts in this area, operating those school districts is a fixed cost. You subtract 50 kids, you add 50 kids, it does nothing for your costs, virtually nothing. And so when you look at an average cost as opposed to the marginal cost, if you add 50 kids to any one of the 3 school districts in this area, all of which, by the way, have declining enrollment, nothing happens to the expenses, absolutely nothing. The cost of 50 more kids or 25 more kids is 0. But if you believe it's 15,000, then you will act so as to exclude them. So that's the first myth, is that they believe that the average cost is in fact attached to every single child that goes to school. The second myth, and it's equally on the opposite side, and that is, if we build age-restricted housing for people 55 and older, they'll cost us nothing. Nothing. They'll pay their taxes, they'll do what they do, maybe go to Florida every winter, who knows. But whatever it is, they're not going to cost our town a dime. Now, the town of Pelham is the first town in 183 towns that has said, that's not true. They're costing us a lot. And I won't enumerate the ways that they're costing us, but just in ambulance calls alone, just in issues that we have with them, it's costing our town a lot of money. And not only are they not paying their fair share, but age-restricted housing is much smaller. It's built with less zoning restrictions, so it's cheaper. So we can't get as much tax revenue from that. And so the town of Pelham just voted 2/3 to 1/3 to eliminate age-restricted housing. First town to do that. And we're going to feature that in the film. But the point is, right now, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of units of age-restricted housing all across the state. And no one under the age of 55 can live there. So that's myth number 2, is that old people don't cost the state. I'm old, and trust me, I'm going to cost the state a lot of money. I don't know when, but it's going to happen, I'm sure. But the money that it takes to provide health care for old people very seldom falls on towns. It falls on the state. State has a Medicare and Medicaid budget that is growing very rapidly, but it doesn't necessarily affect the towns individually. Now, the third myth is an interesting one, because in each town, and there are, 283 of them, most of the people in the state live in the top 200. In each town, there is a firm belief on the part of the planning board and the town board that whatever we do in our town doesn't impact anybody else. And once in a while, when I go to a specific town, they ask me to come and talk about something or other, they listen for a while, and then they finally say, look, you're not from here. Get out of here, because we don't have to listen to you. This is our town. And what we do in our town has no impact on what happens in your town. Even though you may be adjacent to us, we don't want to hear about it. Because every single town is its own principality. The myth part of that is that it has immense impact. That the collective work of each one of the towns in New Hampshire has an enormous impact on the economy of New Hampshire. Over the period since 2008, when there was a recession, because of what I've just described, what we've begun to see is fewer and fewer young people who are available to work, who are available to be in the workforce, to provide the kinds of workers that hospitals need to take care of all those old people, that factories need to produce the goods that they produce, that restaurants need to have waiters and waitresses and cooks and what have you. And there are labor shortages all throughout the state that are very, very severe. And so we started to do Communities and Consequences 2 for the major purpose of showing each person in each town, here and elsewhere, that if they would only allow some housing for young people, for middle-aged people, for working-age people, if they have a few kids, it's no big deal. It's not going to impact your school budget or anything else for that matter, but it will revitalize your community. And this documentary that we're working on right now, and the book which I'm writing with Lorraine Merrill, is going to showcase places like Pelham, places like Bradford, places like Littleton, Lancaster, Dover, and other places where young people, people of all ages, are welcome, and they are totally revitalizing that community. They shop in the downtown, new shops have opened up, and there are plenty of people to work in the various places of employment in those communities. If we believe with this effort that we can convince just enough towns to open up a little bit and allow young adults to find a place that they can afford to live, because that's the big problem. There's very little affordable housing. Then they will benefit, their town will benefit mightily, and it will benefit the entire state. So, what you see here is the cover of the book. I asked Bruce Jones, a fabulous artist who happens to live in Exeter, if he would give me an image of what we're trying to do. And what it shows, of course, is an image of the state that is tilted over, because the state is unbalanced. And we have a group of people, including children, pushing the state and nudging it back into balance. We may be the second oldest state in the nation, but I'm working with other two people very hard to make sure that we never get to be the oldest. That honor belongs to Maine, and we want it to stay in Maine. We want them to stay there. We'd like to move down that ladder to something quite a bit younger. And so the title of the new documentary and book is Communities and Consequences, Rebalancing New Hampshire's Human Ecology. And by showing you and other folks how it was done and can be done, you can see the benefits of having a balanced demography in the state, and maybe someday we can return some years into the future to look more like the state looked in 1990 when many of you were here. That's it. That's the whole reason that we're spending most of 2018, all of 2019, hopefully not too much of 2020, and talking about this and showing what can be done. Now, I don't think I've talked for very long at all, but what I would like to do, and I have some data for this specific area, which I don't have that many copies of it, but I want to go over briefly the two-page handout that I have so that you can see, two pages, one on each side of a single sheet of paper. On the front part is the name of this project and the three people who are involved, and my email is there. If I don't answer your questions or you want to just shout at me, you can send me an email to that address. The partner that we have for this project is New Hampshire PBS. I cannot say enough good things about New Hampshire PBS. They are just wonderful people, and they have been a terrific help to us. And they have actually set up, since we've only raised about 2/3 of the money we need to hire filmmakers and people like that, we're going to crowdfunding. And they have set up a small crowdfunding site, which is shown at the bottom of the page. And it's every donation is tax deductible. So if you want to make a donation, that's fine. I'm not obviously soliciting here, but if you want to help us finish this project, that would obviously be delightful. And at the same time, you're helping up New Hampshire PBS. They do great work, and they've been a terrific help to us in understanding what the state looks like and how we can have an impact. The page on the back is how the state has changed just since 2010. I didn't want to go all the way back to 1990, but just in the last 7 years, because 2017 is the latest data that I have, just in the last 7 years, you can see how the demography has become unbalanced. I mean, I didn't want to compare us to other places, but that chart, to me, is shocking. The fact that our elderly population, I'm one of them, is growing so much faster. In fact, it totally dominates population growth in this state. It's not an accident. It's a matter of design. And so we need to change that pattern and get some more growth in the middle there where there is no growth now. Now let me just say one last thing about what will happen when we can get some growth in the working age population. The first thing you will see is the cost per child in your school district go down. Because now it's going up. But it's going up because the number of children is going down. And simple math says you lower the number of kids, the cost per child goes through the roof. Not because the cost of running the school district has changed at all, but the denominator goes down, the product goes up. So when you increase the number of children, guess what? Cost per child drops. And nothing else happens. And so everybody should be happy about that. In any case, what the other thing that will happen is these shops on Main Street will see even more business than they have now. In the towns that have been welcoming young people, like Bradford and other places, have seen their Main Street look a lot nicer and a lot busier than it was in the past. With that, I'm going to stop and simply say, what are your questions? What are your comments?
Okay, so what I'm going to ask is the other panelists to come on up. We'll meet up on the stage, and then I'm going to be looking for hands from all of you. So just give us 1 second. Okay, so we have some, you can grab a seat at anywhere at the table. We have some table microphones, so you should be able to hear responses from the panelists. Tom's going to let me know if that's not working, and we're going to go to a different microphone system. What I'd like to do is just invite each of the panelists to introduce themselves. So we have 3 folks here. We have Jay Palomino, we have Bob McLeod, and we have Doug Moorhead. And if you wouldn't mind, just say a little bit about who you are, and if you have anything you'd like to start us off with, feel free. Otherwise, we'll go to questions.
My name's Doug Moorhead, and I don't need a microphone, I don't think. So some of you in this room may know me, but I'm a retired police chief from up in Woodstock, New Hampshire. I was asked to come here for various reasons, I think. I'm a kind of a jack of all trades, master of none. But one of the things I just wanted to throw out there, this topic certainly when I was hiring people as a police chief was paramount to me, because we don't have enough people to work in emergency services, younger people who want to stay here. And I do have a little experience across the board. Waterville Valley is where I got my start, where you have to be a police officer, a full-time fireman, and an ambulance attendant. And I will tell you, all 3 disciplines are hurting. And what we're seeing is, if we can hire somebody as a full-time fireman from this area, or northern New Hampshire, and they come to work for the Plymouth Fire Department, they're more likely to stay here if they're from here. We're seeing police officers coming from the southern tier, because we don't have enough qualified applicants, who are coming from Massachusetts, coming up, getting certified, working 2 or 3 years, their minimum in their contract, and then they're headed back south home where their family, friends are, where they want to be in that culture, and of course making more money. If we hire somebody up here who's a local person, they might move to the next town over, but they certainly are much more likely to stay in this area. And I think we all want people from around that we know to work in our emergency services. And then lastly, you have EMTs. And quite frankly, a lot of the smaller departments rely on volunteers. And to go through EMT training and hopefully become a paramedic, it's very hard to keep people in the North Country to fill those voids when they can head south with a paramedic certification, work in a bigger hospital, and make a lot more money. So those are things that we have to deal with keeping our young people up here in the North Country.
Good evening. My name is Jay Palomino. I'm a local business broker and real estate broker. And in listening to Peter, I think it kind of internalized it with me that I deal with what he's talking about almost on a daily basis. And when he talks about myths, when I thought about this, I started thinking so much of it, and our responsibility is to take perception right now that is reality and change that into reality being that perception. And I see it from all different phases. One of them, development increases taxes, specifically with workforce housing. I've worked with a couple of organizations trying to find sites for workforce housing. And I can attest to what Peter talks about. Either there are zoning restrictions which disallow that type of development, or there is the not in my backyard syndrome that many of us deal with. To me, that is a perception. The reality is that that isn't the situation. If you look at folks coming into, younger people coming into a development, it's not necessarily 2.5 children per household. In most cases, it's young adults. In our office, we must turn away dozens of people every week. We just don't have the supply of housing for these folks. So to me, that development, workforce housing development increases taxes, I don't think so. Those folks come to your community, as Peter says, they spend money in your community. They're the folks that go out to eat. They're the folks that use the services that are in town. So to me, that's the perception reality difference. Also, we hear a lot with a not in my backyard syndrome about, do we really want these people here? And I look at them and I said, wait a minute, these people are you, me, the same people who live here now but are being moved around because condos are being sold or homes are being sold. So those same people are the folks that serve us our breakfast in the morning, coach our kids in school. So there is no they. The other perception, taxes in New Hampshire are higher than everywhere else. I sell businesses. The first question people ask when they come in are, what is my tax obligation going to be? And when we start putting out what your business enterprise tax is versus what your real estate tax may be, but let's now compare it to your lack of sales tax, your lack of income tax. If you look at that whole package, New Hampshire is a great place for a small business to come in and start. But then they'll ask, what about employees? Sure, we have an employee issue, as every place else does in the country. But then I level with them and say, you know what, treat your employees well, pay them a fair wage, treat them with respect, and I think you'll find that you not only have a successful business, but those are the types of businesses that are a lot easier for me to sell and a lot easier or more enticing for business buyers to come in to buy. Another perception, either you're financially or you're fiscally responsible or you care about community sustainability. Why do they have to be mutually exclusive? I think you can deal with both in every community and look at what that balance is. The other perception, we don't want workforce housing because our schools are overpopulated. We've heard they aren't. I mean, we're experiencing that in Lincoln-Woodstock. Our school populations are diminishing. We actually looked to think about a ski academy a few years ago to bring more students in because, as Peter says, that base expense is the same. We have plenty of room for other students, other families that are only going to contribute to the community. And the last one is opportunities don't exist in New Hampshire for young people. I contend that they do. They did for us 25 years ago when we came here. I have two daughters, one who's in Chicago now, one who's in Orlando. Are they there because the opportunities don't exist here? I think a lot of it is that there were other opportunities for them in another area. That was their growth. But you know what? We'll find out down the road if they choose to come back here to raise their families, as my wife and I did to raise them when they were children. So I don't necessarily think the opportunities don't exist, but maybe they just don't exist at a time for specific young people, or they haven't found them and we haven't educated them to about what they are. So again, Peter, I support your findings and I see that I live them every day.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you, Jay.
Thanks, Jay. My name's Bob McLeod, and I'm CEO of Midstate Health Center. We have a practice in Plymouth, and we also have one in Bristol. We employ about 106 people. A portion, as we know, are physicians and nurses, and also support staff. So when I look at this chart, I should be very, very excited, and I should say thank you, Peter, very much, because what we do know is the older people get, the more healthcare services they will need. But you know, I'm not really delighted in seeing these demographics, because with this demographic, it represents a lot of challenges for me to run these two practices. One of the biggest challenges right now is that we have more demand than we have capacity. There are people that call our practice every day and want to get in there to see us that particular day, and we just don't have the capacity to do that as frequently as we would like to. The other thing that's concerning is that our population is aging. Guess what? The doctors, the nurse practitioners, the other staff, they're aging as well. I have a handful of very seasoned physicians and providers working today that I know in the next year or two, maybe 3, are going to either want to retire completely or cut back. an additional day. I have some right now that cut back a day. For a physician, it's a 4-day week, 10 hours each day is full-time, defined as full-time. I have people now asking, can I go to 3 days a week? And I say, of course you can, because I don't have anything else I can do to replace you entirely. So that's a big concern. The other concern is not only with our physicians and nurses, but you look at our support staff, or staff that supports our practice, whether they're front desk people or billers or medical assistants or whatever, they're aging, and we're not getting young people to replace them. And so with that comes a whole bunch of issues. More sick time, need to take more time off. There's a variety of things that impact our operation on a daily basis. And although, as Peter mentions, and he's absolutely correct, the funding for a lot of these services come from state and federal government. Medicaid, you know, is about 50% state funded. Well, guess what? I mean, that money comes from all of you. And so when you go shopping and you pay a rooms and meals tax, that money goes back to the state. The biggest line item in the state is to pay for Medicaid. And as our population gets older and there's less active consumers, there's going to be less money to fund these very important programs. However, all of you, including myself, are going to be in need of these services, and who the heck is going to take care of us, because those younger people are leaving. And one other thought about this is that, you know, a number of students that go to college outside of the state, a number of them, something like 50%, don't return after they graduate. And for a lot of my workforce, these are people we're looking for that we can't get back. And so for me, those are real concerns. And I think I would throw out a question that might be answered tonight is, you know, I'm also a realist to say this is the here and now. I can see some real opportunities to grow, to make changes here and to change the trajectory of this state in terms of its demographics. But the here and now is we are a population that is, the pyramid is tipping. We probably look like a cylinder of some sort, but you know, more people are older than they are younger. How the heck are we going to deal with it now, let alone 2 or 3, 5 or 10 years from now?
Thank you, Bob.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we hear from you, we have 2 people that are going to be running microphones. We'd ask that you at least provide us with your first name and maybe the town that you're from. But with that, I want to see if we can get some hands up for questions or comments from you. I see a hand back here. And we're going to ask the panelists or other folks in the audience, if you feel you have a response, try to keep it brief so we can get as many as possible.
Hi, my name is Denise. I'm from Holderness. For the past few years, I've been participating in a study done in the North Country in Coos County on youth retention. And it was a very expensive, very elaborate study that had an incredible amount of data. And it reported out that youth that were followed from middle school through high school started out, and the data was reported female and male, that 97% of the male population felt they would graduate from high school and college when they were in middle school. And by the time they were a freshman, they acknowledged the fact that only 20% thought they might graduate from college. When they went on to explain what would it take to keep them in Coos County, the outcome was really jobs, housing, and opportunities. The top outcome was not one on the survey, and it was the lack of youth voice in Coos County. The fact that whether a job or a place to live exists, that becomes the chicken or the egg. If you can get a job, where can you live? If you can afford an apartment, where can you get a job? That's a really big question. but promoting the ability for our youth to feel that there's a reason to stay here, that they're acknowledged and heard, I think is the foundation of where we need to go. Because I don't think that a lot of us adults acknowledge that. We don't promote it and we don't speak to it. So if anybody has a comment on that, I'd love to hear it.
Thank you, Denise. Anyone?
Sure. I was fortunate to participate in a webinar for New Hampshire Public Television, and the other person with me was a woman named Kristen Oliveri from the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation. And she pointed out that one of the biggest problems in the state is that we are dead last in the amount of money that the state spends on its higher education, that is the state university system in its entirety. As a result, students graduate from college, assuming they do graduate, with the highest debt load in the nation. We may not be the first, we're certainly in the top 5 highest debt, education debt graduates of any other state. And because they have so much debt, they feel very strongly that they have to go someplace where the wages are higher. As you know, we have the lowest minimum wage as well, and so it's very difficult for them to find a job that pays enough for them to pay off that student loan or loans. And so they leave. And so I think that it's a multifaceted problem of not having a youth voice. Because if we had a youth voice, if we had more young people, they would say, "You're strangling us. You're giving us a mortgage and we don't even have a house. How can we possibly become a productive part of the New Hampshire economy, let alone the national economy, when all we can see in front of us is a mountain of debt?" And so we made a huge mistake when we saddled the generation of millennials with $1.5 trillion of student debt. And New Hampshire is part of that problem. And so we need to find a solution to that problem. It has very little to do with housing. But on a local level, we certainly can make it much easier if we would just think about the kinds of affordable housing that young people need to start out, not necessarily in an ownership capacity, but perhaps in a rental capacity until they pay down that debt.
Okay, we're tackling all the small problems in the back.
2 questions. One, has anybody developed any data, any facts about the annual exodus to Florida in the wintertime by old folks, and what impact that exodus might have economically and otherwise in this state? That's one question. The second question is, I assume that any increase in the number of children in the state would also mean an increase in class sizes in the schools.
Okay, Peter?
The class size issue is a sensitive one. I'll answer that one first. Only because I go to Florida in the wintertime. I only go for 1 or 2 weeks. My wife and I only go down there for 1 or 2 weeks, all we can afford. The idea of going there for a couple of months is not in the cards for us, but some people do it. But speaking about class size, one of the impacts, and by the way, it gives me an opportunity to say that I created a chart with data for each of the towns in this newfound Plymouth, Linwood region. And so I've got some copies over there after this is over, if you want to see what's going on in your town. The answer to that question, by the way, is not much. There's very, very little growth in this area at this time, so there's plenty of room for housing for some of those young people. But class size, because the school population in the 3 districts here and virtually the entire state has been going down, the total school enrollment's been going down. They haven't really laid off a lot of people, maybe 1 or 2, but not very many. And so class size is diminished. And so when your normal class size is, say, 20, and suddenly you have a class size of 17, when you get additional kids and it goes back up to 20, everybody says, oh my God, class size is skyrocketing. Well, it's not skyrocketing, it's going back to what it used to be. Now, in some few situations, it was too high. There were too many on a per class size. But for most of the state, and I think it's certainly true here, you can increase the class size, average class size, by 1 or 2 people, 1 or 2 children, and nothing happens. It's just you go from 18 back to 20 or 21, or whatever the number was. But to return to what it was 6 or 7 years ago is really not a huge burden, but it may seem that way because people have said to me, you know, it's really nice having smaller class sizes. And sure, it is very nice, but it's also very expensive because, as I mentioned, the cost per child keeps rising and the taxpayers keep getting itchy about not funding so much. But let me just finally answer the question about Florida. That is a big issue because the only numbers I have is between 10 and 15%, the best number I can find, of the elderly population in New Hampshire disappears in the months of January and February and parts of March. Sometimes people stay until April, but usually it's January and February. And when they're gone, they spend nothing here, nothing at all. And when they're not gone, when they're here, they're very interested in not paying as much in property taxes as they used to. So it's a problem because they don't feel as attached here because they have a condo in Florida. And so their loyalties are split between 2 states, neither of which has an income tax. So I think people going to Florida is not a good thing for the state because it takes away shoppers, it takes away people that are involved in their communities. So I think it's a problem for our state. It's a huge problem in Maine, and Vermont as well. It's a problem in northern New England, which are the 3 oldest states in the nation. I'd like to see a population grow in New Hampshire that stays here all year round.
Okay, other questions and comments? You got one?
I have a question about planning board decision making. I was on the planning board. Oh, my name is Sally Davis. I live in Thornton. I think I was probably on the planning board for 10 years and have been part of a master plan creation twice. And we're about to start a new one, and I want to be able to ask some questions and be able to contribute to the discussion at that time. I don't remember a single zoning decision that tried to defeat workforce housing. I remember twice in Thornton somebody wanting to build retirement housing and being turned down. But it was a decision made that seemed to me to be, the design was the problem. We have cluster development possibilities at Thornton, and we have, the one example of this working was Owl's Nest, which is certainly not workforce housing. It's very expensive housing around the golf course. So what am I missing? What is it that is happening with zoning regulations that is controlling the development of workforce housing?
You want to talk about that?
Yeah, please, Jay.
Yeah, if I could speak to it, because I think I've dealt with it on a couple of different situations. I was a former planning board member for about 8 to 10 years myself, and I can honestly say that we had a couple of projects that did come before us as a planning board, where in the discussion period that we'd have with the communities for those projects, inevitably it was brought up, what will be the impact of these projects as far as our school system is concerned. So I believe that it's real. I've seen it from a planning board standpoint. Conversely, when we talk about senior housing and your experience with senior housing, we had our own personal property that we were approached about a senior housing development coming in. And I remember going to the planning board, and the conversation from the audience at that point was, yeah, we have no problem, it's not going to impact our schools. So it came up as part of the conversation. But you know, it was interesting, we go back to that not in my backyard. Well, the building was being put up next to a condo development, who said, we really don't want that senior housing here because there'll be ambulances coming in and out of here all night. And ultimately, the irony of that was that the first 3 applications for that senior housing development complex came from folks that were living in that condominium development right next door, which goes back to who are these people? These people are us. These people that are already living in your communities. The other point that you made, remind me, what was that? I was going to speak to that as well. Your question about
Where do you put affordable housing?
where do you put affordable housing? And zoning, how zoning can impact. We had a situation in one of the communities. I was hired by a group that was looking to put workforce housing into a community. There was a 22-acre parcel that was available that would have been perfect for this development. We knew that there would probably be some NIMBYism, but the biggest issue was the zoning, because the zoning at one point had been what was called Village Central in this area, which allowed for congregate, I'd call it congregate housing. It could have been 4plexes, 6plexes, multi-unit buildings. However, recently it had been changed to a rural residential zoning, which didn't allow that kind of development. So now this parcel that years ago could have been acceptable for this type of development was now zoned out because the zoning had changed. So it does exist in some communities, but even in North Woodstock, New Hampshire, where we have no zoning, it comes up as a question when we have these different types of developments coming in front of the board, that it does come up as an actual concern.
Peter.
In the work that we're doing now, particularly in the book, one of the places we're going to feature is Pelham, New Hampshire, which happens to be far south of here. It's on the Massachusetts border. And they, just as I mentioned in my talk, just voted to eliminate from their zoning age-restricted housing by a vote of 2/3 to 1/3 of their residents. But then they immediately went into a planning process just like your master plan. And they are finding places right near the center of town, right near the shopping, right near whatever movie theaters, whatever they've got in the center of town, within walking distance. And they found these parcels and they're going to zone them for high-density housing. Because A, they've got water and sewer right there near the center of town, and B, they can build affordable housing where people do not have to own 2 cars and do not put a lot of traffic back on the streets. So when they do affordable housing, if you do it way out in the outskirts someplace, it's expensive because of the traffic and the roads that are necessary. But building affordable housing near the center of town, near the center of Plymouth, or wherever you live, I think is the best and highest use of that property and benefits the merchants who operate in the center of town and causes the least amount of disruption. And finally, to speak to the children part, in Bedford, New Hampshire, over 1,000 people, 1,100 people, signed a petition against a workforce housing project. It was a rental units near the high school with 97 rental units. And 1,100 people came. I went to the planning board meetings. They practically brought pitchforks and tiki torches. They were furious that they would build 97 units of affordable housing. And one person stood up and said, it will immediately put 300 kids in our school and bankrupt us. Well, it turns out the developer already had built a development just like that near another commercial area with 120 units. And the total number of children coming from those 120 units was 23. And some of them weren't even in school. They were too young. So the impact on the school system in Bedford was zero, literally zero. But the people who objected massively to that development were convinced it would put 300. Fortunately, the planning board said, you know, this is a nice development, and they approved it just 2 days ago. So things can change, and putting development, high-density development, near commercial and downtowns is the way to go.
I'll put my Plymouth Planning Board hat on just for a second to say, having recently updated our master plan at the end of 2018, the Planning Board's been working on zoning to address these and other issues. So knowing that there are a lot of other town staff from other towns and other board members here, feel free to reach out to us at any time.
I'd just like to bring up one of the intangibles. You know, we talk a lot about housing, taxes, and things you can, you know, certainly grasp. We want to create jobs. But the other thing is we need to think about, you know, we look at this table of the four wise men here. We're a little older, and you know, some of the millennials we're talking about, it might be nice to have one or two of them here telling us what they need. And you know, I work a lot with kids, and actually I'm working more with Generation Z, the millennials these days. And one of the things that we need to really think about is each and every one of us, how we can you know, pass on some of our wise man or woman, you know, some of our experiences and stuff, and volunteering and touching base with that new generation is very important in creating the bonds to keep people in their community. You know, right here in Plymouth, you know, you have the Katie organization. We have, in some communities in the area, there are some boys and girls type clubs. There's a lot of ways that we can reach out to kids, and I would urge everybody to do that. The other thing is working with kids to touch base with the seniors. Certainly we have a senior population that's growing. We need that younger generation to think about caring for them, whether it be going into nursing or what have you. And if there's any way that you can volunteer and try to get them involved in that, like we do in certainly our our Interact Club at the Lincoln-Woodstock Rotary, and it doesn't have to be just Rotarians. There's 100 different ways out there that you can reach out to the young people in your community. And you know, millennials, sometimes, you know, businesses, there's a lot of discussion about providing a workplace for millennials, and you know, sometimes we portray them as maybe a little entitled or even stubborn, but quite frankly, their need for the latest technology and transparency in what they do, they question everything. You know, it's because they have access to the internet, they have access, and they've grown up with that, being able to get instant information about every topic there is. You know, most of us in this room, when we had to write a paper, we had to go through a card file. Well, you know, that took us weeks sometimes. Kids have that information immediately, and they expect it. And in business and everywhere else, that information and that millennial attitude actually leads to things being more efficient and being more productive when it comes to business. And when you talk efficiency and productivity, you're talking profit. So, you know, it has a lot to do with business being run well and providing that atmosphere for millennials. And now, of course, we're getting into Generation Z, who are even, you know, they're more diverse and they want even more transparency. It's something we have to deal with because it is our future. You know, it's funny, I'm a retired police chief, and as I work with kids, quite frequently, they do question. They want to know why, and it's become a tagline. They'll ask me why we're doing something, and I'll say, because I told you to. And it isn't authoritative on my part. It is the tagline of a joke, because you can't tell young independent young women especially, they want to know because they want to do it themselves, and they're very capable. You have to explain why. Not because they're being disrespectful, because they're empowered and they're smart. You know, I get told things every day, like, well, what are our goals for the day? When I was 15 years old and I was working with an adult, I never asked what our goals and objectives were. And kids ask that today because they're bright. And we need to learn to deal with that, and we need to make the connection there.
All right, speaking of bright, there are a lot of bright people in here Can we come down to Dan way up front and
Sure, we
If-
have a bunch of millennials in here that we'd like to hear from.
feel free, Sarah, if you want.
There you go.
But also, if we can get some dialogue across to some of you, if you know there are other people here, feel free to not just engage the wise men, but each other. Go ahead, Dan.
Dan Boynton, Campton Select Board. And to follow up on the zoning, is there any resources around
Straight,
closer.
straight at your mouth.
Can everyone hear me?
Oh, yeah,
All
it's
right.
great.
Dan Boynton, Campton Select Board. To follow up on the zoning, is there any resources around designing town ordinances and zoning to facilitate this? And then the second question I had is there any design considerations when your town doesn't really have a downtown?
Good, that's super. The major source that I found for that kind of thing is the State Office of Strategic Initiatives, OSI. It used to be called the State Planning Office, but they just had a meeting last Saturday on this very topic. And I think you'll find that fellow, his first name is Noah, and I can't pull his last name out of my aging brain. But the people at the Office of Strategic Initiatives have zoning plans and things like that. And I think you will find that to be a good resource. The other thing you can do is simply send me an email, and I'll get you the name and phone number of the guy that does exactly that for the state and helps towns. The last question that you asked, what do we do if we don't have a downtown? And the answer is very simple. What town are we talking about?
Campton.
Campton. Okay, Campton. Where's Campton? Yeah, there it is. Okay, you got 3,300 people. The population of Campton hasn't changed a bit in the last 8 years. There's no change whatsoever. And so that says to me that with 3,300 people, you can do one of two things. You can find out where people shop, okay, and make a downtown. Zone a place that's commercial and try to get a developer to build some buildings where people can actually conduct business. So you can make a downtown. Or you can get together with whatever town is adjacent and go cooperatively with them. In Exeter, we have a downtown, a solid downtown, but next door to us is Brentwood, and they have no downtown at all. So they shop in Exeter, and the two towns work together, and most of the workforce housing, if you want to call it that, is in Exeter, not in Brentwood. So you may go with an adjacent town, or you may want to think about creating a zone in Campton that would serve that purpose and make some higher density housing, and sometimes the commercial will follow that cluster of housing if it's affordable.
All right, other questions? We got one back here. And then we'll come up front to you, Lisa.
Hi there, this is Mike working, there we go. I'm Chris, I'm from a local town that's very small. I gotta admit, it's interesting seeing a bunch of gentlemen on stage talk about millennials like we're a hypothetical. I appreciate that though. So I'm from a small town nearby that has been struggling for a long time to have enough residents to just fill basic positions in town. And it's gone far enough that it's become basically an existential threat to our town because we just don't have people to fill the cemetery committee.
What town is it, please?
It's a small local town.
That's enough detail.
Yeah. And, you know, we don't have enough people to fill our cemetery committee, to fill a lot of the small committees that any town has. And at the same time, you know, we've had a long history and a very recent history as well of town officials, including, you know, probably planning board and definitely select board men, who have intentionally made policies saying we do not want families in town. And they've made it very, very clear to everyone in town, like, no, we won't allow that because that might mean a family shows up. And they've, you know, added things onto people's deeds and all sorts of things that sound pretty illegal to me, to prevent them from renting, to prevent them from, with the intent of not having families in town. What are some of the first steps that we can take to help our town get better with these sorts of things, and like sort of on the ground tactics for being like, hey guys, like this is a myth that y'all believe perhaps about, you know, having kids in town being a bad thing. And what are some like sort of, rather than big picture, what are some like on the ground tactics that we can take to improve that situation in y'all's mind?
All right.
Well, I've been on the planning board before, but yeah.
All right, some tactics that they can take home tonight and start to apply.
There are 6 towns in this area of Grafton County, each of which has less than 1,000 people in total in the community. Groton, Hebron, Dorchester, Waterville Valley, Warren, and Wentworth. None of those towns have more than 1,000 people in them, and they have no growth to speak of in those 6 places. In my view, one of the possible solutions is to simply merge with the adjacent town. Whatever's next door to you that's got 4,000 or 5,000 people, a couple thousand people, is to merge, is to combine. I mean, I know that's heresy. I mean, I'm surprised you haven't got the tar and feathers ready, because it seems heresy to simply go out of business and combine. But in the Midwest, it happens every day.
All right, but while we wait for it to become politically feasible, and we'll plan your escape route out of here, are there some things we can do to educate these towns? I mean, they are small towns, so we can have meetings like this. That's one thing.
Yep.
And I'm guessing your answer may be your book and the film will be helpful maybe in educating and bringing a more diverse group of people together to talk about the realities.
Yes.
I don't know if any other panelists have other ideas of things that you think could work in the near term to help address the question.
I just think organizing, trying to get the younger folks in the community involved, I mean, that just shouldn't happen. I'm sorry?
What if there aren't a lot of young people moving in because of this policy?
Right, catch-22.
Yeah, I mean, if the majority of the people are old curmudgeons like me, I mean, it might be harder. I don't know.
I wonder if actually maybe an interim step to Peters would be to cooperate with nearby towns and have a bigger dialogue. Because maybe some of the younger folks are in the neighboring towns and it gives you a chance to say, hey, aren't they great? Wouldn't they be great neighbors? Wouldn't they be great on the cemetery committee, on the fire department? And maybe to tackle some of these bigger topics with a small number of towns.
Sometimes it's very hard, I've found in meetings with people, to convince folks that in fact you're committing economic suicide. That if you just eliminate young people from your community, you don't have any future.
Okay, we're going to come down to Lisa, who's in the front, who's been patient. And if we don't give her the microphone, she's going to come up here and use mine.
Yeah, Lisa Donor, I'm from Plymouth, and I teach at the university here. And so a number of the things that we've discussed tonight really resonate with me. I see all of this happening, and I see two things. I teach demographics as part of my environmental science classes, and so I have to wonder how much of this charge is because we are the baby boom generation that is retiring. And there was a much smaller birth rate after this. So how much of this is just the baby boom? And the other part of the question is, I do hear people talk a lot about young people as if they're servants that are here on earth to provide for the security of the old people. And as somebody who still likes to think of myself as on that younger side, I can imagine the resentment there. What about a conversation that talks about what the younger generation needs in terms of mentoring and coaching and encouragement in developing workforce skills that allows them to get hired into jobs here? Because a lot of what I hear is that they don't have the skill sets and that people are being recruited that need mid-level skills, not entry-level skills, and nobody wants to spend the time training the entry-level skills. It's very time-consuming. This is a lot. Choose what you want to answer.
Before we go to your first question, I'll also add, I think in the spirit of the last question, not only what do they need, but what do they offer? Because my mentor is here. So I work with a younger person who's here, Liz. And so it's not just what does Liz need, but Liz has made me a way better professional because of what she offers. The question about baby boomers, is the book deal over? It's just baby boomers, that's it?
The book deal's over.
That'll be easy.
I wish it were. It'd be very easy, because if I drew this chart for some other states, yeah, the baby boomers are aging, but the generation that comes after them really wasn't all that much smaller. And so what you should have is a lot of growth in the 18 to 24 and the 25 to 44, because that's where the millennials are now, and we don't have it. And so we lack the growth in the younger population, but we've got the baby boomers for sure. We got lots of them. And I might also add that when you're talking about the young people and education, the crown jewel, in my view, of the state university system is the community college system. The 7 community colleges are just doing a fabulous job of giving young people and not so young people skills that they need to get a job right then and there. And any one of the 7 community colleges really train people for the workforce and give them an ability to earn more money and be lots more productive than they were before that. And of course, it's a 2-year degree.
Jay?
I think I'd like to offer on the question too about how do we get younger people involved. And as Doug had said earlier, we need to listen to them. I'd love to be able to see chambers of commerce mirror a lot of civic organizations who have realized, whether you're a Lions Club or Rotary Club, a Kiwanis Club, that we need to think about sustainability. We need to grow these young people when we look at it from a civic standpoint as to who's going to be taking care of these communities when we're gone, when we can't do this. And if we don't start taking care of that now, then we're going to be in a lot of trouble. Why can't we take that same model? And I'm just thinking with our small communities at a Chamber of Commerce level, which some of us have done to some degree, starting to mentor younger people. It can get into job shadowing programs, it can get into job skill programs, but we let them pick the curriculums, we let them pick where their needs are, because if you give them that control rather than tell them what we're going to be doing, I think you can see the amount of growth. Again, I believe we can mirror what happens in civic organizations, because thankfully I've been part of that success in watching younger people be able to take control and say, hey, wait a minute, these are our needs, this is what we need, this is what we can do to help you, but we need this in return. So to me, I would love to see local chambers of commerce try to get more involved in creating those kind of programs for some of those workforce issues.
We get another question. Sarah's saying over here. Okay.
Yes, sir. How are you? My name is Sebastian. I live in Thornton, New Hampshire. I want to just add a little bit to what Ms. Denise said earlier about one of the top topic in Coles County about the lack of youth boys. The reason why there's a lack of youth boys is because we're too busy trying to make ends meet to be able to get by. Mm-hmm. I'm fortunate to have a good job, but I'm also fortunate to meet people that don't have they have a good job, but they cannot afford, for example, child care. It's way too expensive in the state of New Hampshire. I have friends that work 10 hours a day. They make about $120 a day, but they have to spend 70 or 80 of that to pay for the babysitter so they can come to work. The other one is wages. Wages are way too low. And I'm a millennial, I can tell you that. I know you were asking about what the young people generation wants. And I can tell you that low wages in the state of New Hampshire. We still have the lowest, one of the lowest minimum wages on the country. And I don't think that's gonna get fixed anytime soon with the current state of our state government. The other one is education funding, like you mentioned, Mr. Peter, is so important. You know, right now we have a town up in Cause, Jefferson, that has no elementary school because the town decided that they cannot afford it. Just like you said, we're closing another school up in Berlin, New Hampshire. It happened a couple of days ago because it's too expensive to keep running. I do understand that. At the same time, you know, I I work in the hospitality industry up north, and I know we hire young people fresh out of high school, and they stay with us for about 2 years, and then they leave. They move to Colorado, or they go to California. And why? Because there's nothing to do around here. We can afford rent. You know, we earn about $600 a week, $500 a week, but our rent is about $1,500 for a one-bedroom apartment. You know, it's an additional number of things. Another one is connectivity, broadband, internet. You know, how can you open a business up in Colebrook, New Hampshire, when you don't have access to the internet? You know, if you break down the road on Route 3 up north, you can call nobody because your cell phone doesn't work. So what else can we do? You know, and the other thing, I'm an immigrant, so diversity. How can we make New Hampshire a little bit more diverse? And with no disrespect to nobody, a little bit less older.
All right, we'll work on that. I'm going to come down in front here, and then we have a gentleman in a tie who's been patient as well.
Hi, I'm Jen Morris. I live in Plymouth. I graduated from Plymouth State and raised our family here, and I think that the gentleman that just spoke took all of my comments, which is great. I'm disappointed. I am grateful for your time and energy and answers and comments, but I am a little disappointed that the panel is not more diverse. Doesn't have a woman on the panel. I really believe, I really believe that to have balance, we need to have balance in our conversations, and that does not just mean age, it means gender, it means racial diversity. There are so many ways that we can honor all of these different people in our state, which has become more and more diverse in my experience since coming here in the early 90s, which I really cherish, because I think in order to support kids and families in our state and keep young people here, we need to have a diverse population. Let me just finish. One of the things that I think I'm not hearing is it's great to be able to offer people jobs. However, what I'm not hearing about is all of the supportive things that need to be put in place to have those jobs be sustainable for families. Childcare, which was just raised, is a huge one. If you think student loan debt is expensive, go add on a childcare bill. It's like 2 mortgages. It's unbelievable. I just feel like you would have more creative ideas if we had a more diverse panel from which to draw ideas from.
I couldn't agree more. And I am very, very discouraged when I travel around the state, and I've visited many, many towns. And the planning boards that I speak in front of, almost all of them look just like me. It's terribly, terribly unfortunate. It'd be one thing if they were, sadly look like me, but they don't even think like me. All they can think about is, we got to keep the town the way it is now. I don't want any changes. I want to keep the town small and manageable, and I don't want any change. And if we get some more young people and some more women on these planning boards, then I think some change would happen. It's not who's up here, it's who's out there on the planning boards, on the town boards, and get them to really make the change that you want to see.
But if you are sparking the conversation to try to make these changes, then I think that you need to have a diverse panel as well.
All right, well, in their defense, they were asked to be here, and they're donating their time.
What's your first name?
It's Jen Morris.
Jen. So, if it's any help whatsoever, I was asked by 2 separate women to sit on this panel. But I agree wholeheartedly with you. And that's certainly a conversation we used to always have. And I will tell you that I speak with the Interact kids I work with all the time, the majority of female volunteers and employees with Special Olympics that I work with all the time, and I have conversations all the time with them about like equal pay with women, okay, in our workplace. And I tell them that's ridiculous, because quite frankly, many of you are going to be more productive and do a better job than some men. You shouldn't be talking about equal pay, you should be talking about better pay. It doesn't matter who you are or what your gender is. Don't stop with equal. If you're doing a better job, demand more pay.
Well, we're not at equal yet.
Oh, not even close, not even close. But I want to go that one step further. And certainly this panel should have, the next time we do this, this shouldn't be the only time. It should be millennials.
The other thing, though, that we need to really consider is we have a school system that really promotes going to college, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
However, trades, in my opinion, are not valued enough in the school system.
Right.
Oh, absolutely.
When a student goes to look at their in-state options, they are looking at the highest in-state tuition in the country.
Absolutely.
So of course they're going to leave.
Right.
And then once they leave, we're not getting them back. We have Stay Work Play New Hampshire. Fantastic idea. Totally failing because we don't have good college options in state that are affordable. Our oldest son is in Montana going to school and staying there to get residency. And it's like a fraction of the cost of UNH. That's so sad to me. I would love to have him here.
Then
But we have so many issues that we need to address. And I love that this is a starting point and that we have so many people here. I think it's fantastic.
The first thing you need to do is elect people to the state legislature that will vote to spend more money on the state universities. Okay? Because we are the stingiest state in the planet when it comes to funding public education. And there's no reason for that, no reason at all. It's because we don't have any diversity until recently.
Okay, Sarah, he's been patient.
Well, that was a good segue, because my name's Vincent Paul Migliore. I happen to be a current state legislator. Full disclosure, I am of the conservative end, but be that as it may. I also have 14 years' experience on the Newfound Area School Board, and I have a bunch of collective thoughts I'd like to share. Most recent two speakers, I think, hit on a couple of key things. This woman in the front in particular. You asked for an action item that we could take forward tonight. The simplest thing to do is, like my parents and perhaps your parents and relatives encouraged you to go to college and get a degree and, monetize it. We need to do exactly the same thing for the trades. That's what this woman just commented on. That's the first thing I think that will help keep people in New Hampshire, because the opportunities are there. The 7 community colleges focus on trades and vocations.
Yep.
That message needs to be inculcated into our young people by us, the people in this room. That's a start. I have a bunch of collective other thoughts I'd like to try to coagulate here for you. The number one fundamental issue, in my opinion, and I believe Peter's as well, is the lack of affordable workforce housing. That's what needs to be addressed. And when it is addressed successfully, there is no major impact on the school system, because for 14 years, when I served on the board, population went from 1,650 kids down to 1,160 now. And that's with 60 kids tuitioning into the district since it broadened and brought in the Hill kids. So we're really down from 1,650 to 1,100. When we started the district 53 years ago, we had 950 kids and we had 4 buildings. Today we have 6 buildings and we're housing 1,100 kids. We could educate up to 1,850 kids comfortably before having to get into crowding the class size in schools to get up to 2,400 before we could need to talk about double sessions. The point is we have far more physical plant than we need. But to Peter's point, The problem with adding 50 kids a year is 2 or 3 of them in kindergarten, 2 or 3 of them in the first grade, etc. So you don't impact the class size, but you do increase or rather decrease when they drop, and that's what's been our average. About 30 to 40 kids per year have diminished in the Newfound area. And that's happening statewide. The numbers went from, I believe in 2010 it was 239,000 statewide, down to what is around 164,000 statewide. Now, what are the reasons for that? And keep in mind that I think the solution to the workforce housing scenario could be if we are able, just think of this as an ideal, if we are able to reduce property tax, just arbitrarily, let's say 25% in a town, what do you think that would do? Wouldn't that draw more people in to that location because the taxes are lower? So keep that as an ideal for a second. Willie Sutton was asked once why he robbed banks, and he said that's because that's where the money is. Well, if you look at your tax bill, most tax bills are from 50 to 75% school. Now I bring you back to the figures I quoted in Newfound. We now have 6 buildings that we're maintaining. Technically it's only 5 because Bridgewater Hebron owns their own building, but be that as it may, there's still a maintenance budget for 6 buildings. I want to know from the panel, and this is a question I'd like an answer to, what will tip off the population to determine that we need to consolidate buildings, much like you just suggested, Peter, for towns to consolidate? Because that's going to be the trick to reduce taxes by that 20 to 25% I spoke of, which would attract people here. Now, just to digress for a moment, why are they leaving? In 2012, New Hampshire was 50th in terms of fertility rate. New Hampshire was 50th in terms of birth rate. Millennials are waiting longer to have children. When they do have children, they have fewer children. They're also giving themselves a raise by leaving the state and going to the South and Midwest, and this is in Peter's first DVD, the Community Consequences DVD, just by lowering their costs of housing. So that's where the population's going. And then you add things like the increase in homeschooling and the availability of Khan Academy and people wanting to teach their kids from home, and then the opting into private schools. Those are all the reasons in combination why our school populations are dropping. So now the question becomes, in my case, in my example, we're now down to 1,100. I asked the question 1,100 times. Will we close a building when we get to 1,099 students? Or are we going to still pay $24 million a year to educate those kids? That's roughly $22,000 per. However you slice and dice this, that's what we're facing. So will it be when we get to 1,098? At some point there's a tipping point, because when you get down to 1, you're spending $24 million to educate 1 kid.
All right, let's see if we can get a response to your question, and then I want to check in with Sarah just time-wise, how we're doing. I'll stay all night, but they may not want to. Yeah, you're welcome. Okay.
Here's the problem that you just described. This state, if it were in the Midwest or the South, wouldn't have 161 separate school districts with 161 superintendents, assistant superintendents, principals, and on and on. We not only have the highest debt in terms of graduates, we have the highest in the nation of administrative costs of running public education, because we have 161 school districts. In any other state, we'd have about a dozen, maybe 20 school districts. So the first thing to do is to think about consolidation of school districts, because the shrinkage is so profound in some places. So we do have a very high cost structure. But the second point is that you go anywhere else outside of New Hampshire, And the state, whatever state it is, provides anywhere from 30 to 50% of the cost of operating those schools. So property taxes in most other states are very low. So when a young person moves out of the state, finds a house and sees their property taxes half, the reason it's half of what it is here is because the state subsidizes public education. We are the only state in the nation where almost all of the cost of public education is borne by the communities, and the communities are very small. There's only 30,000 people live in this part of Newfound, Plymouth, Linwood area. Only 30,000 people. And yet there's 3 separate school districts to serve that relatively small population. There could be just one. But even if there were just one, we'd still have the same expense on the property taxes unless the state says, okay, enough is enough. We're going to do something to subsidize public education the way we subsidize old people. Now, before you get the barrels of tar ready and the feathers, let me say, you know what this entails. And that's a
Don't
broad-
say it.
I will
Don't say it. Okay. Sarah, you have a microphone. I have a microphone.
Yes.
I won't
How are we
say
doing time-wise?
We're doing good. We just need to let these wonderful people at the Flying Monkey go home around 9 o'clock. So we have about 30 minutes,
So
25.
how about maybe 10 more minutes, and then people can actually get to talk to each other and grab the panelists while they're down there? And
Perfect.
Does that sound fair?
Yeah.
I know I
And-
saw Omer's hand, and I think I saw a hand in the back
Yep,
right
we got
next
one
to you.
Here.
Yeah, so maybe
But real quick before I hand the microphone off, I just wanted to share kind of the impetus for this event tonight. So I had seen Peter speak last December, and I was thinking about his presentation for a long time. And I went to an event at the Campton Town Hall. I'm a Campton resident. And I heard some older residents talking about attending a board meeting that evening to speak against a young woman who had an in-home daycare who wanted to expand from 9 to 12 kids, which required approval because it's a home-based business. And I said, oh no. So I went to that meeting, and everyone was very nice. We have great residents in Campton. But their concerns were about traffic, about housing, the value of their home being diminished because there was a daycare down the road. And this poor girl who was just trying to do good, to support her peers who were young adults who were trying to survive in the community, and she was in tears. Ultimately, she was given the approval because that's just how the rules were written. She was allowed to do so. But in speaking out and talking about the fact that it's a great thing to have a daycare in your neighborhood for young adults, young families that are moving in, and it's wonderful to have someone who's being able to support herself living in your community, and that if she was forced to go out of the home, then that business would go away, and so would the services for those families. They told me I needed to go to Waterville and talk to them because they were having problems there. So I felt that we needed to have a much bigger conversation in the surrounding communities. And yes, I did try to get a very diverse panel, but you know what? Everybody's busy. We tried, and these men have been in the community and very ingrained and come from diverse backgrounds. And yes, I know that it's a panel of old white men, but
just the four of them.
Just the four.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, Steve.
But not real old.
Not real old.
Oh, I'm real old.
But it got us here, and we started this conversation. So I thank you guys so much for being here, and I'm going to hand it off to the next person.
All right. Thank you, Sarah. So I think we got Frank, and then Omer will be next. Yeah.
Hi, Frank McLean from Rumney now, formerly of Warren, one of those small towns. I think that volunteering as much as possible will be your solution, and get your foot in the door with everybody in town. That's your solution. What I'd like to discuss is the diversity. I mean, everyone here has had wonderful conversation. I think that what we're seeing is a lack of new construction for single families at an affordable rate, driving to cover the transition from workplace housing, coupled with stagnant wages that haven't been increased in the same rate as inflation. That's all we got to solve, and then we're good, right?
Thanks, Frank.
So the conversation is, I guess my question is for the business broker. Sorry,
Jay.
Jay, are you seeing, we've had Market Basket coming in, they're bringing 250 to 300 jobs. That's what's claimed from Market Basket. That's a huge step here in our area. Maybe to drive up some wages, we'll see. Do you have developers at the ready, you're working in this area, that are looking to put in 90-unit developments? Do you have those types of commitments ready to go? I mean, this is kind of the start point. You know, then we can talk about revitalizing and expanding our downtowns and et cetera. But without that initial support from development in this area, like, I mean, Market Basket made this step. Where do we go? I mean, you're not going to increase tax revenue without new homes, and you're not going to get footsteps in the door when 10% of our population is paying over 50% of their wage in rent. I mean, that's the demographic.
All right, Jay, can you offer anything?
And can you clarify, you're talking about organizations that are looking to put in those multi-unit housing developments or commercial opportunities?
Housing.
Affordable housing.
Yeah, just developers for affordable housing for the workforce.
Yeah.
And then we can worry about the single-family homes and making those affordable.
Okay.
Absolutely. I mean, I know just working with two of these organizations, and I'll mention them ahead, is one of them. Another one is Southern New Hampshire Services. They are looking for communities. There are studies out there that the state has on which communities need this type of housing more than other communities. So in answer to your question, I think simply, absolutely. There are organizations and developers that are looking to come in because they know the need. They know that that need is also going to be supported by the state because the state understands that need. The issue is going to be able to find the properties. God bless Pelham, but I've seen in so many communities those downtown properties that have water, sewer, that have easy access to the services are the most expensive parcels that exist in some of these communities, and a developer can't afford those to be able to offer affordable housing. Whoa. So I think in that situation, it's kind of difficult. So the developers are there. I believe they're waiting for these opportunities to find them. But I think they've got to get beyond some of the zoning restrictions, some of the price restrictions, and also some of the NIMBYism.
I'll just add before we go to Omer, as we work with, I work with communities around the state, and just like we don't want to put everyone over 55 in one part of our town isolated, we don't want to put people isolated by income. So if we have opportunities to integrate different affordabilities into a same neighborhood or into the same area, I think all of our towns should strive for that. So I think we have something from Omer.
Can I just have a real quick follow-up? What suggestions would you have? You're seeing this resistance for affordability for the developers. How can we incentivize, or how can we help our elected officials to see some incentive to make some, transgressions to allow these to proceed? Like what kind of, I've always been a proponent of, reduced tax rate because you're gonna eventually recoup it 10 years from now. If there's nothing there now, in 10 years you're not going to have anything the same. So I've been 75% break, 50% break, 25, and then you pay your full tax bill for new construction. But how can we have the municipalities, is it just electing people? Is that what it comes down to?
I would just say in some cases, it's not necessarily the municipal or town officials that are the biggest issue. We're just dealing with an occasion now where we've sold a 7-acre parcel that could end up with 40 workforce housing units that was completely supported by the local selectmen and the local town government. But now there's an undercurrent of local opposition that is going to come to town. So I think that hopefully if you have the town leaders that truly believe in the need for this type of housing, then hopefully that through the education, the making reality, the perception, will hopefully be able to extend down into communities where they understand, look, this is something we cannot ignore. And those people are us. And we need to make sure that we have housing for them so that businesses will choose to come into New Hampshire or any other communities where they know that they're going to be able to get the employees that they need to be able to be successful.
The other part of the answer I heard in what you just said about the 7-acre example to Frank is density. You know, developers need a certain number of units to make it profitable.
Right.
And if it can be dense and it can be well designed, but they need units. And so in that case, units would be better than delaying tax payments.
Correct.
I can just add one thing to that, and that is I really didn't need this project that we're working on now, quite frankly. I've taken more abuse in the last year and a half from people in Bedford and elsewhere, and not from the planning boards, but from the individuals who firmly believe stuff that's just not true. But they believe it, you know, with a passion, and I'm surprised I haven't been strung up yet. But when this project is done, you will have a book, you will have a film, and we intend to show that film as much as possible here and elsewhere to get people to understand that children are not the enemy. That if you loosen up those restrictions, you will not ruin your town. You will not cost you a fortune. You will in fact revitalize the entire state. We're in competition with 49 other states for those same young people. If we intend to keep them here, we've got to change. And the biggest thing we have to change is our attitude. And I'm not talking about our attitude in this room. I'm talking about the attitude of people who come to planning board meetings with pitchforks and say, I don't want the traffic, I don't want the people, I don't want anything to change. We have to change. And we have to think about what the next generation of young people is going to need, because that's our future.
Okay, I want to keep two promises, one to Omer and one around the 10-minute mark. So after Omer, we'll thank you all and we'll be around for additional conversation. Sorry for the delay.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the members of the panel. My name is Omer Ahern Jr. I was born in Plymouth, New Hampshire, a long time ago. I'm a product of the educational system here in New Hampshire. Two things I really want to mention before I run out of time. This discussion must continue. I was hoping this place was going to be filled. This discussion really needs to continue. The other thing that we haven't talked about tonight, and one of the reasons why I think people come back to New Hampshire, is agriculture. We need to continue to promote local agriculture here in our area. We have a lot of great agricultural components here. Yes, we had another dairy farm that went out of business a few months ago, but agriculture is so important to this area. I am a selectman in the town of Wentworth. I think the individual towns are important to the people that live there. I've been a county commissioner here in Grafton County, 2 separate terms. I've been a county commissioner in Sullivan County, another rural county that has even more issues because I think they're still working on the last transportation plan that is 50 years old. They're still working on that transportation plan. I've served as a state legislator, and all of the things that we need to hear from, and we need to hear from the young people. We need young people. My youngest daughter is now teaching 5th grade in Wellington, New Zealand. She had been teaching school in Concord, New Hampshire. She plans on staying in Wellington, New Zealand. My other 3 children are here in New Hampshire. They're professionals, one's another teacher. So the opportunities here in New Hampshire are tremendous, but we need to hear from you. Go to your select board meetings. Ladies, run for office. Run for state rep. We have a former state rep right here. Good to see you again. Thanks for coming. And But run for office. Part of the problem is people don't want to run for office. I think one of our biggest problems is, well, I'm showing my age, it's a television set. We don't need television. Volunteerism is so important too. And again, I know some of the gentlemen on the panel who, through some of the volunteer organizations that I'm involved in as well. But don't give away our agriculture, because that's a reason why people want to come back here, because this is a beautiful community, and there's a reason why they don't let me go south of Tilton. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Omar. Okay, I'd like to thank everyone for being here tonight and being part of this conversation. I do hope that we can continue to have the conversation, maybe before the film comes out, but definitely when the film comes out. And I'd like to encourage you to connect with other people that you see here, and feel free to connect with the panelists. I'll push them off the stage so you can get to them. Thank you.